Before we begin this episode of Halfway to Healing, we want to let you know that this episode contains discussions around eating disorders, including our lived experiences with disordered eating. We've made every effort to approach this topic with sensitivity, using recovery-focused language and avoiding specific numbers or graphic details. Still, some content may be distressing for listeners, especially those currently struggling or in early stages of recovery. If this topic feels unsafe for you right now, please take care of yourself in whatever way you need, whether that means skipping this episode, pressing pause, or listening with a support person nearby. You're not alone, and your well-being always comes first.
Hello friends, and welcome back to Halfway to Healing. I'm Sharna.
And I'm Sam, and today we're talking about something that's close to both of us. Eating disorders, specifically the life that comes after diagnosis, because recovery is very rarely a straight line and no two journeys ever look the same.
Between the two of us, we've lived through a range of diagnoses, from anorexia and bulimia to ARFID and EDNOS. And today's conversation is about how these diagnoses changed our lives, and most importantly, how healing is possible even when it's very messy.
This episode is for anyone who's been through it, is still going through it, or is trying to understand what recovery actually means to them beyond the clinical definitions. We're not here to focus on symptoms. We're here to talk about rebuilding trust, joy, and life beyond the illnesses.
Just before we dive in, we want to set a few really important boundaries for this conversation for both Sam and I and you as listeners.
Firstly, we'll be using recovery-focused language throughout this language, which means we will not be sharing numbers, body descriptions, or any graphic details, because comparison is extremely unhelpful and also unnecessary.
We'll also be keeping any references to specific hospitals, treatment centres, clinicians, or people anonymous. This is about our lived experiences, not anyone else's.
And while we will be honest about our past struggles, our focus is on life after the diagnosis, what healing has looked like, and what's surprised us, and how we've learned to reconnect with our bodies and to ourselves.
If you're in recovery or feeling vulnerable right now, please take care of yourself while listening. Please come back later, or even skip this episode if you need to. Your well-being is more important, and that is what matters.
Wow, eating disorders. This is the big one.
I know.
This is the big one.
Gosh.
This is the topic that started this whole
really
idea. And it's a little scary. It's like, you know, like even now I'm like feeling like I'm tense. I've shared my story so many times, but it's like I've never had like a conversation.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, I mean, where to start? I'll start. I think
go for it.
I have had anorexia, and I've had avoidant restricted food intake disorder, or ARFID, for short. Not that I can ever remember which of the order those letters go in when I type it out.
We were doing it before, and Sam's like, what letter? A, F, B. I'm like, you're getting
just
there.
throw the alphabet in there. What about you? Like, which eating disorders did you have?
So I've also had anorexia nervosa, like you, bulimia, and oh gosh, I've forgotten the acronym now. Like you just did. Eating disorder.
EDNOS.
EDNOS. Eating disorder.
EDNOS. I got that. I still messed it up.
It's weird, isn't it? Eating disorder not otherwise specified.
Yeah.
EDNOS. Yeah.
It's so funny to me because, as I think I've told you before, I don't know if I brought it up in the thing, I've read the DSM-5.
I'm aware. You're like, this is my favorite
This
book.
is a great Sunday reading. And there is a whole section on eating disorders in the DSM-5. Like, it's not just under anxiety or mood disorder. Like, it is like its own section. And there's so many eating disorders that fall in there. And even with all of those, there's still, like, you have eating disorder not otherwise specified.
Yeah.
Because I'm not going to remember what order those letters go in if I try to shorten it. And it's crazy. And I think society has such a look and such a opinion about what eating disorders look like. And from what I know of your story, your diagnosis was hard to get. Because you didn't fit that typical characteristics of an eating disorder.
I don't know, like for myself, something when I first got my diagnosis of anorexia, I guess I presented looking somewhat ill, but I don't know, I feel like there's in your mind people with like eating disorders, they're always like, well, I can always go further, you know? And I don't know, like I almost like didn't believe it because I was never like hospitalized or anything. And so I'm like, oh, well, I wasn't actually really sick enough, you know? And so I think that's always been something, recovering from anorexia, being like, well, was I really sick enough? So like, and there's always this like notion of being sick enough, you know? And that's something that I think made starting recovery quite hard, trying to do the right thing when your mind is constantly telling you, no, you didn't make it far enough, you didn't need to be hospitalized.
Yeah, and I think, at least for me, like I know being so malnourished basically, because I had an eating disorder, that it was like I couldn't think straight enough to go, this is a good idea.
Exactly.
Like I didn't have the cognitive capability to be like, you know what, this is what I need to do, because my brain was just so wiped. I think the only thing I thought of was food.
Oh, same.
That was it.
I don't know, like it's weird to explain, like you're so hung up on food, but not like allowing yourself it, I guess.
Yeah.
Especially with that talking about like our first initial diagnosis with anorexia and stuff, not allowing yourself it, but that's all you're thinking about.
Oh yeah.
It's really sort of like a weird comparison.
It's so weird, and it's weird to live it as well. Like it's so weird. And then other people get really confused when they find out that you've got an eating disorder. Yeah. And it's like, oh, but you really like baking, and you really like cooking, and you like, you know, planning meal. It's like, you know, it's like, well, it's all part of this, you know, disorder.
Yeah.
How did your like diagnosis evolve?
My diagnosis really quite evolved. So I was diagnosed with my eating disorder.
Oh, when were you diagnosed with your eating disorder?
So I was diagnosed in about March 2020, so right before COVID. Really.
How old were you?
I just turned 18. So I just finished high school. I turned 18 in the November. So it was so I just finished school. And it was like starting uni, and I don't know, I feel like 2020 is a whole thing in itself because like, you know, there was so much stuff going on, but literally right before COVID was when I was diagnosed. So diagnosed with anorexia nervosa to start off with, and then basically had to do treatment and like recovery like at home, I guess. Oh,
that would have been a nightmare.
It was weird, like having like like having like dietitian appointments online, having like GP appointments online, psych sessions online.
That's kind of wild because based on what they're supposed to be checking,
exactly,
especially for anorexia, with the doctors. I know we talked about clinical stuff, but like clinically, there's like a checklist. Like, how do you? I have no idea. Like, how are you supposed to do any of that if you're not seeing these people in person?
Yeah, it was. So I don't know. Like for I guess the dietitian and the site, it was more able to be, I guess, online. Whereas with the GP, I don't know. I'd go first thing, and I always book the 8 a.m. appointments because I don't like wanting to like wait around all day, being like in waiting mode, and the further the day gets on, the more the doctors get behind. So if I'm the first one, it sort of gets it done like really quick. And so, you know, being like, it was weird because you'd have to like wear your mask and everything, and I'd go to the nurse's station first, get all
the obs done.
Oh, the obs done, and then pop into the GP for like a minute, and then and even like other times I wouldn't have obs done and just be like done online.
It's actually interesting you say that, because I forget too, because I was diagnosed at the end of 2019, so just before COVID, and so I forget actually that most of my treatment was done that way too. But I think it's a very different situation because I ended up being hospitalized, unfortunately. And so that kind of changed it. Like they're gonna, but then it made it really lonely because I wasn't allowed. Like I wasn't allowed visitors. I wasn't, and I'm like sitting there with my one-on-one special nurse, being like, it's like you're the only person I can talk to.
Like, want to play cards or something?
But yeah, I was diagnosed. I was 19, end of 2019, 3 months before my 20th birthday.
Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh. Yeah. So going back, I might backtrack.
Yeah, backtrack to my actual question. I just thought it'd be good to know how long we've been in recovery for.
Yeah. So pretty much the same.
Maybe just a few years.
Yeah. So I was I was diagnosed in like March 2020 or whatever. Was in this recovery sort of space for about a year and a half, and I'd just been seeing, and I saw a new psych about a year and a half later because every psych and like dietitian I've had have like moved overseas. Like my original dietitian moved back to America, and then my psych moved to England, and I was like, help me please, you know.
What are you doing?
Exactly.
Don't give me abandonment issues.
Literally. And so probably about halfway through 2021, this psych was like, I think based on your behaviours now, you more so fit with like a bulimia diagnosis. So I guess the psych diagnosed me with bulimia, but it's not really on my like medical record because like my GP's, I guess, in charge of that. So if like I look at my medical records, it'll just say anorexia nervosa. And then, you know, dealt with bulimia related symptoms, I guess is the best way to phrase it. And then got sort of better with all those sort of like actions, I guess. And then my GP, after maybe another year or two, would that be 2020? Yeah, maybe another 2 years, so 2023, my GP was like, I think you don't really fit into either of those two categories anymore. And so then was like, okay, we'll just put your eating disorder as EDNOS, eating disorder, not otherwise specified. So that's basically how mine have progressed. And I guess I'll talk a bit more about how they sort of, in my mind, changed. But yeah, what about you?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with anorexia nervosa. And I still have that. That is still like my diagnosis on all my medical records. But when I was talking with either my psychologist or my dietitian, someone, and we were talking about like where it kind of stemmed from, because I've had like eating disorder, like disordered eating patterns for my whole life.
Wow.
And when I was doing almost like a mapping exercise of like how this all came about, it was brought up that it actually started as ARFID instead of anorexia, and just the fact that as I grew up, it just sort of obsession merged. Kind of merged and shifted. So I don't have like a formal diagnosis, like you don't have one of the bulimia, like a formal one of the bulimia. But so I don't have a formal diagnosis of ARFID, but I definitely can recognize those symptoms and those symptoms and those patterns and things, especially when I was younger. And even now, like in recovery, like there's some things that are very aligned with those behaviors that are not, that I work on and I work through in recovery. But it was just really interesting to kind of get that hindsight. I did, however, about a year into my recovery, I was talking to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist was like, oh, it's not possible for you to have anorexia nervosa because you've been in recovery and you've weight restored and you don't meet that criteria.
Yeah.
And I lost the plot. I was like, I'm in recovery doing what I'm supposed to, and now you're trying to like, you know, and I know for my eating disorder, it felt like something was being taken away. And I recognize now that that was not I'd like to hope that wasn't the intention, but the competitive nature of eating disorders very much, I think, took over and was like, almost like, how dare you take that away from me? When, you know, and so I have a lot of strong opinions on fluctuating diagnoses in the eating disorder space, because a lot of the time, I know it's happened with me, it sounds like it happened with you, that as you learn to stop doing the behaviours and you recover and you don't meet those symptoms anymore because you're going through recovery, you can accidentally fall into a different eating disorder.
Absolutely, yeah.
And in my opinion, my non-medical opinion, I don't think that should be indicative of what the person is suffering from. You know, because just because I'm doing the right things in recovery and I'm not meeting those criteria anymore, to me that should be indicative that I'm making progress, not indicative that I've got a different disorder.
Exactly, yeah.
I don't know if you feel the same way with how how it was kind of positioned to you with
a bit of
the
both,
change in
I
diagnosis.
I think, I don't know, like a bit of both. Like, I know as I was recovering from anorexia and was becoming more like weight restored, that certain behaviours, I guess, I couldn't do, you know, especially with the restrictive subtype, which I had. And so I don't really know how, but I guess with that weight restoration came like those binge purge behaviours. I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to...
I think that's general enough. Like, it's fine. Just keep in, you know.
Yeah. I don't want to, like... Whoa. And so in my mind, I was still, like, anorexic, you know, just with, you know, the binge purge subtype.
Yeah.
But then when I saw this site and they were like, you know what, I think you're actually, you fit more into a bulimic category. I felt that same rage like you did, because I don't know if this is the case for you, but in my mind, there's like a hierarchy of like eating disorders. Like there's,
it feels like it, doesn't it? Right? Like it feels like there is
like the best one.
The best one to have. I was like, how do I say that? But that's how it feels, and that I'll just use this minute to say that is not the case.
No,
and I know very
all.
much in my recovered mind that every eating disorder is valid, but I do know when I was in my active eating disorder, it did feel like there was a best one. There was one that was going to be taken seriously, you know, and so very much relate to that, you know.
Yeah, so when I got this, I guess, non-formal change in diagnosis from this psychologist, or maybe a psychiatrist, I think it was a psychiatrist, I was like, oh, the only reason you're changing my diagnosis is because I'm stable, you know? And I was like,
oh yeah,
when I feel like you could have just like changed the anorexia subtype, you know, even though, I don't know, because it really bugs me how even for like admissions or like places still use whatever your weight is based on like a criteria, when, you know, it's not about how much you weigh. Sure, that's a symptom of it. Yeah. But
I mean, I wouldn't even say that the weight is a symptom. I would say the weight is a result.
A result, exactly.
Yeah, like it's... So I completely agree. I think using... And I've been turned away from so many different treatment centres because I didn't fit the weight or BMI criteria, and it's like...
And it's just like pushing this narrative in your head that you're not sick enough.
Exactly.
Because they're still using your weight based on a diagnosis or like an admission.
Yeah.
And, you know, no matter what weight you are, you can still have very serious health complications from an eating disorder.
100%.
Like, you know, atypical anorexia. Those people are still like at a, you know, I say standard in like brackets, you know, standard weight, because the BMI system is absolute
it's
shit.
Such bullcrap. Bullcrap.
I love that.
I meant to say bullshit and bullcrap came out.
Yeah, I love that. But, you know, and then, you know, people feel like people with like binge eating are just like, oh, we'll just go on.
Which can cause the same health complications that that restrictive eating can cause as well. And I think there's such a misunderstanding, and I think it's why so many people with eating disorders have this competitive, I have to have the quote-unquote best one.
To be taken seriously.
Not even to be taken seriously, but so that, like, I know for me it was like, if I wasn't trying to aim for that, that I wasn't, almost like I wasn't good enough. Yeah. Like, I'm not even good enough to have the right kind of eating disorder.
Absolutely. That's exactly.
Which is it's so messed up to say. It's like, what kind of, that's what starvation brain does to someone.
Literally.
at least that's what it did to me. It just totally warped my brain.
Yeah, I know. Like, I very specifically remember, like, I don't know, like a psychologist or my GP telling me, like, a person with, like, cancer doesn't wish they were more sick.
Yeah.
Whereas a person with an eating disorder mindset does. And it's like, why are you thinking that? You wouldn't wish that on any other, like, condition to be more sick
you wouldn't be like, I'm not sick enough. I need to be sicker.
I need to be like stage 4 cancer or something.
Yeah.
You know? Like, you know, so weird.
And I think, and just touching on that, it also means that it's really hard to tell who does and doesn't have an eating disorder.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, it is impossible to tell. I've met so many people in recovery that, you know, you just wouldn't be out.
Exactly.
I mean, there's probably been times in my life you could look at me and not think
you don't
that I'm struggling with that.
Because it's a mental disorder.
It's a mental disorder.
And
it's not, you know...
It's not like a physical... Well, I don't know how to phrase it without, like, crossing our boundaries. You know? It can... You know what I'm trying to say?
I do. It's a mental disorder that results in... Basically, the physical stuff is side effects.
Exactly.
Of this mental disorder.
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to put it.
That's a great way.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, and so... I think it's so important to hear so many different people's stories around it, because so many people have so many different experiences. Like I said, there's so many different eating disorders, you know, and it's kind of weird to get that diagnosis. It's very confronting. I don't know about you. When I got my diagnosis, I was in the hospital for something totally unrelated, and they're like, by the way, by the way, you have an eating disorder.
Wow.
It's this one.
Wow.
And I was so, I've never felt more, like, defensive and aggressive.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, because I knew.
Yeah.
I knew. I totally knew that there was something wrong with my behavior. That was not a secret to me. But having someone else identify it and be like, now you're going straight into treatment, I was like, and look, to be fair, why I was in the hospital was for rage reasons. Yeah. And, like, my brain was not in a good place. Yeah. But then to get that, I was like, I don't want to go to treatment. This is not a problem. And then I, like, doubled down on, like, denial and, like, all of these things. And it was so confronting. And I remember being so uncomfortable. And I almost felt like a hostage. They wouldn't let me eat. Like, they wouldn't let me leave until I, like, got this diagnosis and then shipped me home. Wow. Like, but... it was really confronting for me.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. Like, I know when, I don't know, like, my mum was sort of noticing, like, certain changes in me, she'd be like, she would say certain things that were, like you said, very confronting, and I'd be like, no. But, like, you know, like you said, I knew.
Oh, I so knew.
I knew. And then, literally one day, my mum's like, that's it. We're going to the doctor. And I was too scared to even say the word, like, eating disorder or anorexia. And I was, like, there, like, shaking in the GP's room. And, like, my mum was like, hey, I think XYZ's going on. And hearing, like, having the doctor do, like, this assessment and actually say those words was, you know, very confronting. I was, like, shaking. I was crying. But, like, I knew. But, like... being, you know, I feel like you're quite defensive of your eating disorder. Yeah. And then finally having someone confront you about it, you want to, like, push them away so you can keep in that eating disorder mindset.
Like you said before, it's one of the very few things where you're like, I want to be sick. I want to be sicker.
They're so competitive.
Yeah, it's insane. I know... because I didn't, at least not that I know of, I didn't have anyone in my life who was noticing these things in me.
That's kind of sad.
Up until, like, I got this random hospital doctor who's like, you have an eating disorder, like, and
you're like,
and I'm like,
I don't.
No. Stop. But no one in my life noticed, at least didn't tell me that they were noticing these changes. Maybe they did, I don't know, I'm not in other people's heads, but didn't tell me. No one, like, had expressed concern. Like, nobody sat me down and was like, we need to take you to a doctor. Like, so, which is why I think my eating disorder went on for so long, because I didn't have people be like, that's not great. Maybe you should see a doctor. But let's talk about maybe how, like, getting our diagnoses didn't doesn't always equal understanding or like immediate support. I think that's a good segue from what I talked about, what I just said about nobody noticing, or at least not telling me that they noticed there was any change in my anything. Yeah. Did you have, like, when you got your diagnosis, well, firstly, actually, did you tell people?
No, I told no, like, other than, like, my parents, because I was living at home, I told no one. Because even when I was seeing, like, a psychologist and stuff, they're like, well, why are you here? I would, like, whisper. I'd be like, you know, I was so scared of saying the words. So I told absolutely no one. The only people that knew were my mum, my dad, my brother, and, like, my GP in psych. That's it. What was the question again?
Did you tell anyone? Did anyone know?
I mean, no, but I feel like we did have some, well, I say we did have, we still do have some family friends that I guess sort of noticed before, like, my parents noticed, I guess, because, you know, my parents were with me. They'd see me every day, whereas...
And it's a slow change, right?
Yeah, whereas I'd see these family friends and they'd, because it would be a while between each time I'd see them, they'd be able to notice more. Yeah. And so I think they sort of alerted mum. So I think I think mum actually told them without even telling me, honestly. But I think they knew, but I didn't. Mum did, without even, like, telling me. But thanks, mum. But yeah.
No, I mean, no one knew for me.
Yeah.
Like, my partner at the time didn't know.
Wow.
None of my friends knew. And I was literally shipped off to treatment, like to hospital. And I told people I was in the hospital, but I didn't tell anyone why I was there. Yeah. And because of COVID, no one could visit me. So no one could see what treatment I was getting to be like, ooh, that's, you know. So... Yeah, and I didn't tell my parents either. So it was just doctors, that knew. I didn't open up about it until probably, I think the first person I told would have been, that wasn't a doctor, would have been maybe 6 months in.
Wow.
To treatment. And that was different partner that I had. But at that time,
your partner at the time.
My partner at the time, but a different partner that I was talking about 5 minutes ago, because I swapped partners.
As you do.
That's why I was like, you know, different partner.
Gotcha.
Told them, but they knew, and they were pretty supportive and all of that, but it was just one of those things. And I know for the longest time, I think it wasn't up until maybe the end of 2023, early 2024, that I would even say that I had anorexia. Yeah. Like, I would just be like, I have an eating disorder. Yeah. Like,
or, like, I would even say, like, I'd be like, oh, I have difficulty with food, you know?
Yeah, I'm weird with food.
Yeah, I'm weird with food. I would say that all the time. Like, I wouldn't even say, like, eating disorder.
Yeah. Was there anyone in your life that you told that just couldn't could not grasp their head around it, like, understand what it was going on, why it was a thing?
I think, like, obviously, like, my mum, because my dad's a FIFO worker, fly in, fly out, and so because this happened during COVID, he was actually away, and then lockdown happened, and so he was stuck on the west coast of Tasmania for like 6 months. Right. And my brother didn't live at home, so it was just mum and I. Yeah. So mum probably had a bit of, because mum was like the only sort of like support I had, I guess, at home, and, you know, she was organising like all the GP appointments, because I guess she sort of was the one that was like, that's it, we're going to the doctor, you know, one morning, and I was like, oh gosh. So I think I remember her like coming into my room and just like sort of like sitting with me and crying and be like, you know, like, why is this happening? I don't understand. You're beautiful and stuff, you know. But then I feel like my dad, on the other hand, he's very, I'm gonna say academic. The man has a PhD, but zero common sense. Whereas I think before I got my diagnosis and mum was being like, hey, Sharna's being weird with food, my dad was like, oh, what if you get an app? You know, be like, then you can track it. And I'm like, Dad, if you don't think I already know that stuff in my head, I think he was trying to like find a solution, being like, oh, she's just she should track it or something. And I'm like, Dad, if you think I'm not already tracking it. So I think it was both sort of confusing for them, sort of in different ways, if that makes sense. But and like my brother, I guess, all sort of didn't quite, like my mum has dealt with like, anxiety and depression, but I'd say this was probably the first like time that a mental illness had quite seriously affected all of us, because my brother would come down from the city and be like, oh, let's go out to dinner somewhere, and Mum would be like, well, Sharna won't go there, Sharna won't eat that, Sharna this, that. So it also affected me in that way as well, because like, what they were saying was true, but like, I don't want you to exclude me from
It's almost, I know, I mean, I did a lot of it alone, or like with very limited people, but it still feels like, at least it felt for me like, now, not only in my own head is everything revolving around food, but then outside everything's revolving around this diagnosis and still revolving around food. Right? Like, and that to me, that for me was really hard. Like you said, like, people find out and then it's like, oh, well, Sam doesn't want to do this and Sam can't do this, and does this fit into Sam's treatment, and does the blah, and it's like, so not only was I dealing with like this internal battle of like, I'm trying to get through this, but everything is still like, I'm really early on, and all of everything is all about, and it just feels so much like everything is just about this disorder. And I know I felt so much of my identity stripped down, and especially in my admissions as well, when it's like, you are monitored 24/7, and it's like, I almost didn't feel like a person anymore. Like I was incredibly sick, but, and I needed it, but once I got my diagnosis, I almost didn't feel real. Like I didn't feel like a person, because everything, my relationships with people who did know about it, I was constantly going to appointments, and so many appointments.
Oh gosh, don't get me started.
They're like, and it's important because it kept me alive. But it really did make me feel like I wasn't really a person, that there wasn't anything but this disorder.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's almost like people are like, I don't know, like sort of like tiptoeing around you, and like don't want to like, oh, I don't want to say this or that, or do X, Y, Z. I don't want to trigger Sharna. I don't want to, it's
like, everyone's walking on eggshells. Like, and it's like, just, I'm a big person. It's
like, if something gets to me, I'll try my best to let you know, especially like in my early recovery. Whereas now I think I'm more confident telling people like, hey.
My favorite thing is, because my parents are not great with knowing what to even like, they're like, talk about very triggering topics, basically break all of our guidelines of this episode all the time. And it's really funny. I do it when other people aren't here, but as soon as like I have a friend like
I've noticed
here
you do that.
with like any kind of disordered eating or eating issues, I like go into like glucose guardian mode, where I'm like, don't talk about that.
None for my child.
Like jump in front of it. Like, that's not a helpful conversation topic.
You really do.
Because I have like that instinct, because I know for me, like even though I'm in pretty stable recovery now. It's like sometimes, and I swear to God, my parents bring it up before food as well, and it's like it's like you can't even pick your fucking timing right. Like
oh my gosh,
but there was such a process of learning to live with food not being the main character.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, that was such a process for me, where it was like, I can have other stuff in my life.
My brain,
I can do, actually, a really big thing for that was art therapy.
Nice.
For me, was like learning that, because I'm very creative, I'm a very creative person, and all of that kind of thing, where it's like, okay, and value work. I've done so much value work. I can drop my values down so fast. Anytime someone's like, what do you value? I'm like, bam, I've done this. I've got you.
I got this in my pocket.
Was there anything, like, how did you find that process of learning, like, that food's not the main character, that there's more to life?
I did a lot of value work as well, like you said, and almost sort of like, I did a bit of work sort of like exploring, I'm gonna say like heritage, like who, I'm like my counselor at the time, she's like, oh, I'm an Asian American, and this is my family heritage and culture. And so me sort of exploring, like, I guess, not where I came from, but where I sort of came from and who I am and my values, that really helped me as well. And I don't know, I would always, I don't know if you had to do this, but I had to, like, record what I ate.
Oh, when I moved back home from where I used to live, I had so many food log journals, and I was just keeping them. Like, we're talking 4 years worth of food log journals, and I'm like, write down, and you had to like write like reflective pieces on like, how did you feel, what did you like, before you ate, when you ate, after you ate. So
I found those when I very early on was helpful, because, you know, I was like, okay, well, really, like, not just like mindless eating, just like being quite, I want to say, like, present and like feeling how you are feeling with these things, and then reflecting after. And something, one of my counselors, or my psychologists, they told me about this technique called, like, surfing the wave, which is basically sitting, I don't know if, I mean, you probably do.
I do know what it is, but for our listeners,
but I was going to say, I don't know if you've experienced this, but then I was like, well, that's going to be silly, because I know you have. A lot of, like, guilt after eating, and so surfing the wave is basically just sitting with that uncomfortable feeling you have and just letting it
right out.
Yeah, right out. And that was something that I found quite helpful, especially after I'd eaten, because I would have so much guilt after eating. I don't know if you probably did as well, because
I did.
Yeah, it's just, you know, I feel like a very common thing, you know, all this guilt after eating. So that was something that I found really helpful. But also, I don't know, when with going back, I might just go back a bit to the food logs. Like, I feel like it was helpful, but it was also a bit unhelpful, because I was thinking about the food again.
It's so funny that you say that, because the way that my eating disorder presented, I found them really triggering. I found, like, I understood the purpose. I needed to be able to, especially with my very terrible memory, to be able to take something to my dietitian, to my psychologist, and be like, this is how I was eating, this is what I was feeling. But because it is very similar to some of the behaviours I did, that I found it so triggering and so difficult, because I didn't want to just stop at what the set rules were of what I was supposed to be tracking. I wanted to slip back into the eating disorder behaviours. So I found food logs so unhelpful for my own journey. And I ended up getting to a point where I was like, I am happy to write what I'm eating. But, like, this level of detail is just not helpful for me. But I could only do that when I got to a point of recovery where I was not really feeling things around food, and like negative things around food, and I didn't need to surf the wave or deal with that in as much depth. But so it was kind of interesting that you said that you did find it helpful, but also not helpful, because I didn't find it helpful because it was like, this is basically, I felt it was basically just a different font of my eating disorder.
Like, I know if I was not home, I would get a bit stressed. I was like, oh, well, it's, according to my food log, it's, you know, afternoon snack time. And if I was like, I'm like, well, I can't, if I was like late having it, that sort of
it's like derails you a little bit,
slipped back into very much, for me, big part of my eating disorder was like time. And so that sort of almost like reinforced it. So it was helpful in some ways, but then also not, because it was very like it was good initially, the structure, but then it did sort of be like, well, this is, I don't know how to explain it, but
I totally get what you mean.
The structure was good, but then also not good.
Yeah, and I think that obsessing.
That's the word.
The obsessing, like, my eating disorder was so rigid, and it was like structured around food and eating disorder behaviors, and then going into recovery, I almost like shift. It's like, okay, I'll just take this obsession and control issue that I've got going on, which caused my eating disorder. Now it's on recovery.
Yeah.
And again, still not shifting that focus away from like the diagnosis and all of that. It was just it was still my whole life. And it wasn't, and I think that's why it wasn't until I left clinical treatment that I started to get better. Because when I went to lived experience spaces where we were just chatting,
Exactly.
kind of like how we're chatting here, but also in like, I know you and I did a group where it was just about the art, and these conversations didn't happen. It wasn't until I did those programs where it was like I could learn to have fluidity around recovery and it was recovery focused and it wasn't diagnosis focused like clinical treatment felt like for me, that I could actually kind of see the forest through the trees and actually go, oh, shit, recovery is possible. I can get better from this. This is not going to be my whole life forever. I'm not going to go in circles of like just crap, because the way I did my clinical treatment, I really do just shifted that control from the behaviors of the eating disorder to I don't even call it recovery, but I call it treatment, because I wasn't recovering. I wasn't getting out of that mindset. I wasn't getting out of that mindset. I wasn't working on the things behind the eating disorder, because it's not about food. I mean, I became so obsessed with food, but it wasn't about food. That was just the side effect. I don't know if you felt like that.
No,
like
definitely something, even after all these years, I'm still trying to almost figure out what it is, and some sort of control, but what that was, still sort of trying to figure.
And I mean, it's okay not to know, and for some people, like for me, and it sounds like a little bit for you, it's about control and feeling like, at least for me, it's like I felt like there wasn't anything I could control.
So you control your food.
I controlled my food.
Exactly.
Some people it's an identity thing. Some people it's, they don't know who they are. And it becomes this obsession. Some people there's so many different ways that eating disorders develop. And I know a lot of places try to come up with preventative measures. And I know with social media, and we're going to talk about that in a whole nother episode, because it's such a big topic. There's so many different reasons that these things can manifest, that eating disorders specifically can manifest. It's not like bipolar, where it's like you just have a brain chemical imbalance. They're such complex and such deadly disorders, and we don't know really how people, some people who grew up, for lack of a better term, totally normal lives, had a normal, develop an eating disorder one day, and which is kind of a scary thought, that we just don't know where they come from, especially because you're basically bypassing biology. Right? Like, I was bypassing biology, and like basic human needs.
It's so weird.
It kind of trips my brain out a little bit, that it's like, it's a mental disorder that can rewrite biological needs. And that is crazy to me.
I know. Like, I remember someone saying to me, like, we have these basic needs, like any other animal would not deprive itself of nutrition.
No.
But a human
not unless
would.
it was forced to.
Exactly.
But a human would,
A human would, yeah.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah.
We've been talking for a really long time.
I know. I was just looking at the clock. I just noticed the clock too.
Yeah. Let's end with, I think, what would you say to someone who felt that recovery wasn't possible, or is too far away, or doesn't feel worth it, or what would you say as like a hopeful message to them?
It's always worth it. I know you're having these thoughts. Trust me, you're not the only one. We've both been there, had these thoughts, and it's gonna be really tough, but step by step it's going to get so much easier, and you're gonna have so much more freedom. And just
every time you say freedom around food, I just think of you and your almond croissant.
My croissant. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
That's all I think about when you say freedom around food is almond croissants.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about.
It's a core memory for me, and I wasn't the one having almond croissants.
It's so good the first time I had one.
I just love it. It's something I will honestly treasure forever, is you
Yeah.
sharing these almond croissants with me.
Yeah, and it's going to be, you know, it's going to be scary and it's going to be tough, but, you know, it's going to be worth it, and you're going to be so much more, like, happy and free and not, you know, restricted by your eating disorder, you know?
Yeah. I would add to that, it's important to find the method of recovery that works for you.
Not everything works for
because
everyone.
I know from personal experience that the way I was doing recovery, I was not going to recover. But so you've got to find what's going to work for you, whether that's art therapy, whether it's group therapy, whether that's, there's so many different types of therapies out there. I know here in Australia we've got the Butterfly Foundation that can help link you to supports and all these different supports across Australia. I don't know about other countries, unfortunately, because I am not Google. Yeah. I'm not Google.
Damn.
Or an AI chatbot. But once you find it, I second what Sharna said about the fact that it is worth it. It is hard. It is hard work.
Yeah.
And because it's hard work, if you need to take time off of work, if you need to prioritize this, do it.
Yeah, like I cut back to part-time for uni. Because it was just too much.
I ended up doing one
focus.
subject a semester. Like I know that's still part-time, but like part-time to me feels like more than one.
Yeah, I was doing two. I know what you mean.
I only did one subject. Some semesters I didn't do any.
Rude, interrupting our podcast.
I know.
I bet I know
it's
who
my
that
beautiful
is.
girlfriend.
I know. I was going to say, I bet I know who that is.
But it is worth it. It is hard work, and do what you need to do to recover. Find what's going to work for you, because that's important. Otherwise, I can very much see other people feeling like they're going in circles and that it's not worth it if you're not doing the treatment and the recovery that is going to be best for you. Awesome.
Yeah, and I think I might just add, I remember we were talking about, like, there's different steps in, like, what's the word? Like, willingness to change.
Yeah.
So, you know, like, I know you said when you started your eating disorder recovery, you were not...
I was not willing.
Like,
I was genuinely just thrown into that deep end, like fully just thrown in, and everyone was like, "You have to do the work."
So there's like
barring your life needing saving.
Yeah.
And I say that as in, if you are in a position where you are needing hospitalization or you are needing care so that you survive.
Yeah.
It is okay to wait until you are willing to go into recovery.
Yeah.
I think the most damaging thing for me was just being thrown into it. And I think that's why it took me so long when I wasn't ready.
Yeah.
You know, and I say that with a bit of caution because this is a deadly disease. And
the
deadliest, number one, like, killer.
Mortality rate.
Yeah, thank you. I was like the number one killer. That's not right.
On today's True Crime Podcast.
So I do say that with an asterisk.
Yeah.
Absolute asterisk. But I think if you don't feel you're ready to make those steps, but you can acknowledge that you need help, at the very least, in my opinion, my non-medical, non-qualified opinion, be seeing someone you can just talk to about this, who can kind of keep an eye on you and check in with you. Because everyone's life is worth it and everything. So I do say that very strongly with an asterisk. It's not. Is it still dinging? No.
It dinged again.
Okay, I was like, I could just hear a ding just constantly in my head, and I was like,
I think it's only done twice.
I've had it ding like 6 times, and I'm like, who wants me?
That's paranoia.
But no, I say that very much with an air of caution. Your life is important. Your life is worth it.
Definitely.
But be gentle and be kind with yourself. Cool.
You want to do the social spiel?
Oh, we'll do the social spiel. We have social media stuff. We have an Instagram, which is halfway to healing with underscores between halfway to and then healing. I put it in
basically where each space.
In the spaces. That would be a great way to put it instead of
underscore between the space.
Yeah. I put the links in the caption. We also have a website where our episodes go up live, and we are trying to put blog posts up as well to talk a little bit more in depth about our own experiences. I know I've written some fun ones as well, a little bit tongue-in-cheek because I am a funny person.
Yeah, very funny.
And obviously here on YouTube. If you're listening to this on YouTube, you might be listening to it on the website, and I've just said here on YouTube. Yeah. But we've got socials. We'd love for you to follow us just to see what we're doing. Next week's episode is chosen family and chronic care, and I talk about that again from mental and physical health mental and physical health perspectives of like what chronic care looks like, self-care looks like, how people can support you, but really finding your chosen family, people who love and care about you, because I know for myself, blood is not everything.
Absolutely.
And that's next week's episode.
Yeah. Have a good week, everybody.